Yugi vs Judai, the grand finale of Yugioh GX that leaves us satisfied and dissatisfied all at the same time. As the face-off between the protagonist of the first anime versus the protagonist of the second, the duel does not disappoint, a perfect testament to both characters and their strategies. But who won the duel? That's the part that's left open-ended, and so today I'll break down the ways this duel could have concluded. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others. Now, let's dive in. To set the stage, Judai and Yugi are nearing the end of a fantastic duel. During the final turn, we see Judai bring out Magma Neos with 6300 attack and Shining Flare Wingman with 4300 attack. Attempting to go for game, Judai attacks Dark Magician Girl with Magma Neos, which Yugi counters with Magic Cylinder. Judai dodges the damage by defusing Magma Neos into its three components via Contact Out, summoning back Neos, Grand Mole, and Flare Scarab in attack position. At this point, the Pharaoh takes over for Yugi and pulls off a very Pharaoh-esque play. Since Judai has summoned a monster, he activates Dark Renewal, sending his Dark Magician Girl and Judai's Grand Mole to summon a spellcaster from his grave. Ordinarily, this would be Dark Magician, but because earlier the turn Yugi used Mystical Ref Panel to absorb the effect of Code Change, a card Judai played that has the effect of changing a monster type listed on a card text, the Pharaoh changes the word Spellcaster listed on Dark Renewal to Divine Beast, thus allowing him to summon Osiris, or Cypher. If this sounds wonky, yeah, you just gotta watch how it works. So anyways, the Pharaoh now controls Osiris with 5000 attack, Judai has Neos boosted to 3000 thanks to Neo Space, Flare Scarab at 500 attack, and Shining Flare at 4300 attack. Judai has one card in hand, which is Wing Karibo, his spells and traps are Heroes Guild, and the aforementioned Neo Space. The Pharaoh only has Osiris on board, but it is the strongest monster out currently with 5000 attack. Having been special summoned from the grave, it will go back to the grave at the end of the turn. His 5 cards in hand are Blackluster Soldier, Valkyrion, Buster Blader, Magical Hats, and Karibo. Finally, the life point count stands at Judai 1600 to Pharaoh 3500, and we are currently in Judai's battle phase where Judai can attack with any of his 3 monsters and also still has his normal summon for the turn. The standard assumption I'll make is that both duelists are not running any cards we have not seen them run before. For Yugi, this means anything he had through the duration of the original anime, excluding anything related to Legendary Dragons since those are confined to their arc. This duel is taking place after an alleged Battle City V2, but the bigger takeaway is that over the course of this duel, Yugi has used cards we didn't see him or Atem use until Waking the Dragons or the ceremonial duel. Cards unique to filler are also fair game since Dark Renewal was used in this duel, and only used by Yugi in filler arcs in the original series. But I will stop short there and not evolve his deck further. This is important to note because the version of Yugi's deck seen in GX includes the likes of Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, and Dark Magician of Chaos. Since we never see Yugi use these in the original anime, the assumption is that he doesn't have them yet. If you're not a fan of that assumption, I'll further argue that with the effect of Subspace Battle, Yugi could have chosen Envoy instead of the Ritual Blackluster, and could have chosen Dark Magician of Chaos instead of Buster Blader since it's stronger, but in both cases, he didn't. So that's why I say that these two cards aren't in this version of Yugi's deck. As for Judai, his deck will include anything he's ever shown during GX except the evil heroes used as Supreme King, cards played when using another duelist deck such as Ojama's, and cards he temporarily had such as Rainbow Dragon and Free the Brave Wanderer. Another assumption for Judai is that he only has one copy of each fusion, and both duelists are running 40 card decks. Now for the elephant in the room. The big assumption we need to make here is whether or not Judai has actually declared an attack with Neos. With no other effects to activate, this would cause Judai to lose the duel. So a prevailing theory out there is that Judai hasn't actually declared an attack, instead this visual is simply that. A visual to demonstrate everything Judai has done to get to this point, and his ability to stand his own against the king of duelists backed by an Egyptian god. And I will side with this assumption, if for no other reason than because this video wouldn't exist if Judai attacked with Neos and lost the duel right here. More concretely though, Judai is familiar with Yugi's deck, and even if not the most studious guy, should at least know that Osiris will go back to the grave at the end of the turn while he will maintain all his monsters on board. But I actually want to go back one step further. Judai makes a major misplay during this turn that he will now need to account for with drastic measures. We'll get to that in a second though, comment below if you think you know what I'm referring to. As I mentioned in my Who Would Have Won Between Kaiba and Bakura video, there are 3 ways I assess how a duel will unfold. The statistical method, the good move method, and the best card available method. The statistical method looks at which is most probable. I largely ignore this method since anime duels are more dramatic than they are realistic, and since we're talking about the 2 best duelists of top decking, it's safe to say each duelist will at least get a very good move. The good move method means a duelist will tilt the game state in their favor. The best card available method grants the duelist the best card that their deck has to offer, which at this point in the duel may result in game. I will use both of these methods in this video. Back to the big misplay I was talking about that Judai made. Were you able to guess it? That is summoning Flare Scarab in attack mode. This move made absolutely no sense because by leaving out a 500 attack guy in attack position, all the Pharaoh needs is a monster with 2100 attack to go for game. Even if Judai doesn't recall the specifics of Yugi's deck like Reborn, Brain Control, and Change of Heart, he literally just saw Yugi add Blackluster Soldier with Subspace Battle, as well as a monster to use for its ritual summon in Valkyrion. Even though it's not known to him whether Yugi has Blackluster Ritual, you can't just leave yourself open like that. Since Judai has no other ways to block an attack, he has to get Flare Scarab off the board, and the only way to do that is to contact Fuse in his main phase 2 with Neos. And the reason why I said this is a drastic measure is because the Pharaoh still has Osiris on board at this time, so when he summons Flare Neos, Osiris' second mouth effect will trigger. If he brings out Flare Neos in attack mode, its own effect will grant it 1200 attacks instead of 3 spells and traps on the field, plus 500 more from Neos space. Once we subtract 2000 from Osiris' effect, Flare Neos will be left at 2200 attack. While this is still not ideal, it's a lot less likely that Yugi busts out a monster with 3800 attack to go for game. The alternative would be for Judai to summon Flare Neos in defense, but the problem with that is that Osiris' second mouth effect will now reduce Flare Neos' defense by 2000. Since neither its own effect nor Neos space grants it additional defense, its defense will be reduced to 0 by Osiris and thus destroyed. So Judai has to decide between losing Flare Neos, leaving himself susceptible with Flare Neos at 2200 attack, or just staying put and leaving out Flare Scarab. As explained, the last alternative is a no-go. The other two alternatives are simply a matter of how much of a gamble Judai wants to take. On one hand, it would be incredibly odd to see an anime character bring out a monster just to get it off the board. On the other hand, if we consider the best card available method, Yugi would win with Monster Reborn bringing out Osiris, or Brain Control or Change of Heart taking Wingman to destroy Flare Neos and burning Judai for game. Because of this possibility, Judai has to bring out Flare Neos in defense so that Osiris can get rid of it. If that happens with another E-Hero engraved, Shining Flare Wingman will jump to 4600 attack. The only other move Judai has this turn is summoning Wing Karibo. Keep in mind that the anime doesn't really believe in set monsters and Judai has never set Wing Karibo, but it's not a complete impossibility, so I'll be lax here and say Judai can and does set Wing Karibo. And he needs to do this because if he only has Shining Flare Wingman on board, then again, cards like Change of Heart or Brain Control will win Pharaoh the game. With that, Judai passes to the Pharaoh. Since we're assuming 40 card decks, the Pharaoh has 19 remaining, having gone through 21 already. Obviously, there are more than 21 other cards we've seen the Pharaoh use throughout the series, which is why the methodology here is very important. We can break down the Pharaoh's good moves into offensive and defensive. Offensively is Monster Reborn. This would allow the Pharaoh to bring out Osiris and get rid of Judai's remaining threat, the Shining Flare Wingman, and reduce Judai to 1200 life points. The Pharaoh wouldn't have much of a follow-up though, and only Karibo in hand to try and buy another turn. Side note, since the way fusion monsters work is different from dual monsters to GX, where in dual monsters a fusion counts as many tributes as its materials, but in GX this is not the case. So if you're wondering why he can't just Brain Control the Wingman and tribute it for Buster Blader, that's why. Defensively, the Pharaoh has a handful of moves, including Swords of Revealing Light, Multiply to work with Karibo, Spellbinding Circle, and Cyberjar. He could even use Monster Reborn defensively by bringing out Dark Magician to work with Magical Hats. Keeping Karibo in hand is better for him since GX has since retconned Multiply to not summon an infinite amount of monsters. Cyberjar could easily backfire by giving Judai more monsters, and Monster Reborn would be better served offensively, so it will reduce his defensive moves down to Swords and Spellbinding. How about best move? Does the Pharaoh have a way to go for game? Yes, there are in fact 3 cards that will allow him to do so, all of which are draw cards: Card Destruction, Graceful Charity, and Pot of Greed. Any of these would allow the Pharaoh to draw at the bare minimum a 2-card winning combo. For example, any 2 of Brain Control, Change of Heart, and Soul Taker would allow the Pharaoh to tribute both of Judai's monsters to bring out Buster Blader. Even if Soul Taker grants Judai 1000 life points, this would put him at 2600, making Buster Blader go for exact game. Graceful Charity and Card Destruction would give the Pharaoh even more cards to work with, 3 and 5 respectively, opening up even more possibilities for game. So if we play the duel out with each duelist's best move, the Pharaoh/Yugi will win. This is actually independent of how Judai handles his misplay of leaving Flare Scarab in attack mode. But let's say we keep the duel going. What can Judai do now? Now keep in mind that Judai has some moves that could likely stall out for another turn. He also has some traps that could pan out in his favor if the Pharaoh attacks into them, such as Mirror Gate or Soul Union. But since we're being nice here and granting Judai an extra turn of reprieve, I'm not going to extend the duel much further. He needs to win this turn, because if he allows the Pharaoh to get another turn, the Pharaoh will surely win. So can Judai pull either situation off? I'll break this down by responses to both the Pharaoh's offensive move and defensive move. In the defensive scenario, Judai still has Shining Flare Wingman at 4600 attack, but instead of an open field, the Pharaoh has a stall card like Swords of Revealing Light or Spellbinding Circle, plus the Kuriboh in hand for added insurance. So now Judai has to get rid of the stall card to then be able to play around Kuriboh, who could otherwise block the Wingman's attack. As stated, Judai needs Pot of Greed here, and this is surprisingly a duel where both players have yet to explain what Pot of Greed does, which is giving the duelist who uses it the exact 2 cards they need. Judai's only backer removals are Righteous Justice, so one of his draws with Pot has to be this. His other best draw with Pot will be Monster Reborn, which will allow him to revive the Aqua Dolphin he sent the previous turn with Subspace. This would give him a monster lineup of Aqua Dolphin, Shining Flare Wingman, and Wing Kuriboh. Judai would then use Hero's Guild, get his game on by flipping over any other warrior that he can pitch to use Aqua Dolphin's effect in order to strip the Pharaoh of Kuriboh. Righteous Justice will clear the back row card assuming the Pharaoh didn't set the magical hats as a bluff, and then Shining Flare Wingman can attack for game. The offensive scenario is where the Pharaoh gets rid of Judai's Wingman with Osiris, reducing him to 1200 life points. Since Osiris goes back to the grave at the end of the turn, the Pharaoh has a wide open field, but at 3500 life points, Judai would have to get out 2 monsters on board with 3500 or more attack, since at least one will be blocked by Kuriboh. Judai of course doesn't know that the Pharaoh holds Kuriboh, but let's give him the best possible move. His best move again starts with Pot of Greed, netting him Monster Reborn, but instead of the second card being Righteous Justice, this time it can be Prisma or any other card. Likewise, Hero's Guild needs to net him Prisma or any other monster. Judai summons Prisma by tributing his set Wing Kuriboh, uses it to send the Neos he sent back to his deck the previous turn. Monster Reborn's Dolphin pitches the extra card he has to get rid of the Pharaoh's Kuriboh, which in turn inflicts 500 damage to the Pharaoh. Judai can now contact Fuse Prisma as Neos and Dolphin into Aqua Neos, who thanks to Neos Space will bump up to 3000 attack, and this will be exact game. So we can conclude based on all of this that if we give the Pharaoh his best possible move, he will win the duel. But if the Pharaoh has to settle for a good move that gives Judai an additional turn, Judai's best possible move will allow him to win no matter how the Pharaoh played his previous turn. This is as fitting as it gets for a showdown between 2 protagonists, and I leave it to you which you think would be the more likely conclusion. But what if we wanted to script the duel the best way possible? Here's a 4th methodology that I like to call the anime method, which basically says that the duel should unfold in the most dramatic way and keep true to the characters. This duel has included highlights of both duelists, from Flame Wingman and the Neos fusions to Dark Magician and Osiris. We even get to see both players have their respective Kuribohs in hand, even if they aren't used. But there are still a number of cards and combos emblematic of each duelist that have yet to be seen in this duel. For Judai, this includes anything related to Yubel as well as additional Neos fusions. For Yugi and the Pharaoh, this includes his other Egyptian god cards, or even the likes of Dark Paladin and other bosses. In the anime method, we want to include as much of these aspects as possible. So it's not just about getting the best card for the game, but the best card for the character and for the aesthetic. This also harkens back to a previous point I made that it would be weird to see Judai go into Flare Neos just to get it off the field. Yes, this is technically his best move, but it's not something you would ever see happen in the anime. To take all these factors into consideration, this is my opinion on how the duel would unfold. First thing is to take a step back and place Scarab in defense mode. The reason for this is because if Judai keeps it or even a Flare Neos in attack mode, he's going to lose. So we have to fix this misplay. Judai ends his battle phase not being able to take out Osiris. In main phase 2, he sets his Wing Kuriboh to go alongside his board of Shining Flare Wingman and Neos in attack and Scarab in defense. Judai passes to the Pharaoh, and during the end phase, Osiris goes to the grave since it was special summoned from the grave this turn. The Pharaoh draws Graceful Charity. With it, he draws 3 cards. He discards Valkyrion and BLS, then activates Awakening from Beyond. Judai draws 2 cards, and the Pharaoh adds Dark Magician back to his hand from the grave. He then activates Polymerization to fuse from his hand Buster Blader and Dark Magician to summon Dark Paladin. The Pharaoh enters his battle phase and attacks to destroy the Flare Scarab. He sets 1 card to his back row and passes to Judai. Judai draws and triggers the effect of Heroes Guild and uses it to get Spell Striker off the top of his deck while the Pharaoh loses a card off of his. Then Heroes Guild is destroyed. Yubel speaks, "Judai, it's time." Judai nods and special summons Spell Striker by banishing Spark Blaster from his grave, then tributes Spell Striker and Winkaribo to summon Yubel. The Pharaoh and Yugi both feel an immense force upon Yubel's summon, and Yugi tells the Pharaoh to not take this spirit lightly. The Pharaoh nods in agreement. Judai enters his battle phase and attacks Dark Paladin with Yubel. Thinking Judai has a plan, the Pharaoh activates his set Zero Gravity to change the battle position of all monsters on the field, putting everything in defense. Judai smiles, saying he needed to draw out the Pharaoh's trap. He then activates Super Polymerization in hand, discarding Glow Moss. The King of Duels confidently states, "Judai-kun, my Paladin can negate the activation of spell cards by discarding one card from my hand," as he starts to discard magical hats. But the King of Fusions responds, "Super Polymerization cannot be chained to Yugi-san." The effect resolves, fusing Neos and Yubel into Neos Wiseman, which thanks to Neospace comes out at 3500 attack. The Pharaoh remarks to Yugi that he hasn't felt a force this incredible since Osiris and Obelisk clashed in the Colosseum. Judai sends Wiseman to attack the Paladin, then reveals its effect to inflict damage to the Pharaoh equal to the Paladin's attack while he'll gain life equal to its defense. Judai gains 2400, but then questions why the Pharaoh's life points didn't decrease. The Pharaoh reveals his in-hand Karibo, discarding it to protect his life points. Bear in mind Karibo's anime effect works on monster effect damage as well. But since Karibo was used to block the effect damage, the battle still goes through and the Paladin is destroyed. Judai ends his turn, score now 4000 to 3500, Judai. The Pharaoh draws and activates Pot of Greed, which nets him 2 cards. One of them is Monster Reborn, which he activates, revealing that once more Heroes Guild sent a divine beast to the grave. This time it is the Winged Dragon of Ra. He then changes it to its immortal Phoenix mode. Judai thinks to himself that the force is far more powerful than when he dueled against Franz. The Pharaoh says that only the strongest duelists are worthy of facing Ra in its most powerful mode, as he reflects on Jonochi's encounter with it against Malik. The Pharaoh pays 1000 life points to use Phoenix mode's effect to incinerate Neos Wiseman. Judai braces against the force of Ra and remarks, "Yugi-san, Wiseman cannot be destroyed by card effects." But the Pharaoh responds, "We'll see how your creature fares against the most powerful Egyptian god." As the smoke clears, Judai is shocked to find that Wiseman has vanished. The Pharaoh sets 1 card, then proceeds to the end phase where Ra returns to the grave. The Pharaoh ends his turn, score 4000 to 2500, Judai. Judai draws 5th Hope and activates it, returning from his grave to the deck Burstinatrix, Avion, Clayman, Bubbleman, and Neos, then draws 2 cards. With 5 less elemental heroes in the grave, Shining Flare Wingman's attack drops to 3100, but still enough to win if a direct attack goes through. Judai changes it to attack mode and declares an attack, to which the Pharaoh activates his face down, Diffusion, sending the Shining Wingman to the Fusion deck. Since the components were banished from Miracle Fusion, Judai gets no monsters in return. He proceeds to main phase 2 and activates Convert Contact, discarding Dark Panther and sending Hummingbird from his deck to the grave to draw 2 cards. He activates Fake Hero to summon Elemental Hero Neos, then Contact fuses it with the 6 Neospatians in his grave by shuffling everything into the deck, bringing out his ultimate, Divine Neos. He activates Divine Neos' effect to banish the 6 Neospatians from his deck, granting it 3000 attack plus 500 more for Neospace, putting it at a grand 6500. He uses the copied effect of Hummingbird to gain 500 life points since the Pharaoh has 1 card in hand, then ends his turn, score 4500 to 2500, Judai. Judai remarks, "Yugi-san, this is my greatest monster. It overcame darkness itself." The Pharaoh is in awe, then smiles. "A monster worthy of a god." The Pharaoh draws Altar of Restoration. He uses it by banishing the top 2 cards of his deck, Gamma the Magnet Warrior and Black Luster Ritual, to add Card of Sanctity from his grave to his hand. He then sets Magical Hats and activates Sanctity. Both duels draw 6 cards. Judai gets Neos, Bubbleman, Clayman, Avion, Burstinatrix, and 1 mystery card. The Pharaoh begins his final combo. He pitches Beta the Magna Warrior to summon the Tricky. He then activates Necromancy to summon 4 monsters from Judai's graveyard to Judai's field in defense mode. Necroshade, Blade Edge, Spell Striker, and Winkaribo. He then activates Tricky Spell 4, tributing the Tricky to summon 5 Tricky tokens since Judai controls 5 monsters. He tributes 3 of them to summon the final Egyptian god, Obelisk the Tormentor. The Pharaoh tells Judai he truly is a special duelist, coming face to face with all 3 Egyptian gods in a single duel. Judai, beaming with joy, tells the Pharaoh he could not have asked for a better duel. Then his smile changes to a smirk. "But my divine Neos is stronger than your god." The Pharaoh smirks back. "I'll show you just how powerful a god can be." He tributes the remaining 2 tricky tokens, increasing Obelisk's attack to infinity. The Pharaoh yells, "Obelisk! God Hand Crusher!" Obelisk charges toward divine Neos, and Judai can only smile. In this duel, he withstood Osiris, then Ra, and is now facing Obelisk, much like how students from his school would transition from Osiris Red to Ra Yellow to Obelisk Blue. But while students may graduate, he now knows that graduation doesn't signify the end of learning and growing. It's a never-ending journey, and that is signified by how Obelisk boasts an infinite attack. Just kidding, Judai probably thinks, "Neat," then discards the last card he drew from Card of Sanctity. Honest. Yugi-san, with this card, my Divine Neos gains attack equal to your Obelisk. Divine Neos' attack begins to rise toward infinity, signifying how even though the journey to learn and grow is endless, so too is Judai's potential to learn and grow. The 2 behemoths of infinity clash in a grand explosion as the screen fades to black. So that's my take on the potential way the duel could have wrapped up in a manner true to the dramatic nature of anime duels, as well as further showcasing the best of both duelists. Yeah, there might be some holes there. I'm sure Sam over at TGS will turn around and drop a "Was Yugi about to defeat Judai custom card guy edition?" But let me know who you think would have won and how it would have gone, and how the anime method stacks up. If enough of you all are interested, there are a lot more unfinished duels throughout the anime that could be fun to explore. You can check out an earlier one I did on Kaiba vs Bakura here, as well as an in-depth analysis of Yugi and Joey's unseen duel here. And if you are a fan of the content, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. Link is in the description. I've been making Yu-Gi-Oh videos for about a year now, and I sincerely appreciate all of you who've been along for the ride. Let's make year 2 even better.